The genius of this optimizer comes in the build settings and presets. Where we start is bracketed ownership. Now, these are preset based on the default. You might have to hit use presets to actually generate these, but these are preset based on winning analysis from past tournaments. Every single DraftKings slate that has pretty much ever been played in NFL DFS, and particularly over the last couple years, goes into studying what trends are best. And this is about balancing contrarian upside with high probability plays. So what this says, for example, is in every single lineup built, you're asking for at least one player less than 5% projected ownership and no more than 6 guys under 5%. This one here says we want at least 3 players in each lineup under 10% projected ownership and no more than 8 under 10% projected ownership, so on and so forth. So again, this is just creating a balance between contrarian upside in your lineup and high probability plays. You don't want to get too contrarian, but you also really don't want to get too chalky. That's what this does. In fact, it does an even better job of this than total ownership. Total ownership is trying to do the same thing. It's just that bracketed ownership is more effective in doing so, which is why we leave total ownership at this pretty wide band between 50 and 180. We also don't want to leave too much money on the table here, which is why we only have the default at 400 left on the table. And essentially what this is saying is, let's say you were to leave $1,000 on the table. Well, now you're asking every $5,000 in your $5,000 player in your lineup to beat all of the guys up to $6,000 that you don't have in your lineup. You're asking every $7,000 player to beat all of the guys up to $8,000. You're asking too much of each guy, which is why we don't want to leave too much money on the table in any one lineup. Ceiling projections blend. This is a bit of a personal preference. Now, if you watched the player pool tutorial, you already know that if you plan on editing projections, you don't want to use much of the ceiling projection blend. In fact, you should probably leave it at 0, because the higher you use the ceiling projection blend, the more you're going to drown out the changes that you went through all the time and effort to actually make. Personally, I want the ceiling blend pretty high. I like to leave it around 70%, because that's really now starting to account for the player's full range of outcomes, not just what his most likely outcome is, which is what we want to do in DFS, particularly when we're going for those big tournament wins where you need ceiling performances. Randomness, again, personal preference here. The higher the randomness, the easier it's going to be for the optimizer to build to your minimum exposure requirements or asks, preferences, if you will. And the lower the randomness, the more it's just going to pull the quote-unquote optimal lineups based solely on the projections themselves. I like to leave randomness for points kind of in the middle, so that it has an easy time giving me the minimum exposures that I'm asking for. But I want to leave projected ownership randomness fairly low to take advantage of the fact that we have the best ownership projections in the industry. The reason why we want some projected ownership randomness is, remember, we have these bracketed ownership requirements. Let's say a player is projected at 10.2%. Well, there's a decent chance he's going to be 9%, right? I want some lineups to have that player count as one of the guys under 10%, which is why we don't want projected ownership randomness all the way down at 0.